is EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. Across the country, a growing number of school districts are experimenting with a 4-day week, giving students and staff a 3-day break from learning and work. Donnell Hobbs, a national education reporter for the Wall Street Journal, took a look at this trend, and she joins us today to discuss what she found. Tawnell, welcome back to EWA Radio.
Thanks for having me.
Why did you want to tell the story?
Well, I've just noticed more and more school districts had started moving to the 4-day school week. So I had looked at some research, but it was really kind of outdated. Some of it hadn't been updated in a while. So I went ahead and reached out to all 50 states, and I reached out to DC, and it came back that in the last decade, it went from 120 districts on using this 4-day schedule to right at 600. So I'm like, wow, it's really increased. And it wasn't just on the western side of the map anymore. It's moving east now.
Well, what I did think was interesting in your story when you talked about the jump from that 120 districts in 17 states to over 600 districts in 22 states is that growth isn't just rural, is it?
No, it's not. And it's actually growing. I mean, this is a trend that used to be mainly in the rural districts, and now it's moving into, the urban and suburban areas. And even with the 22 states, that is a minimum. There were several states that just did not track their districts that are using 4-day school weeks. So the 22 states is definitely a minimum.
What is driving this? What are some of the benefits of the 4-day week from a fiscal standpoint?
The initial reason is always about saving money because, you can cut down a day of operations, running buses, running utilities. But they've also started looking at recruitment, filling teacher vacancies. Some of these districts say their budgets are tight and they cannot raise teacher salaries like they like to. So they see it as almost a perk, come work for us and always have a 3-day weekend.
What I was really interested in is sort of the spike happening after the recession and in the wake of the recession as districts try to save money. Mm-hmm. But some of them have held onto it for reasons beyond the cost savings. Talk with us a little bit about that.
That's a good point. You do notice a spike in 4-day school weeks when there's a recession. But also, these districts, once they go to a 4-day school week, it is very hard to go back to 5 days. There's been a few districts that have went back to 5 days. Some of them have promised that they would if the financial picture improved. But, in talking to superintendents, it is very hard. Once people get used to having a 3-day weekend, it is hard to go back to 5 days.
From a logistical standpoint, how does the 4-day week work? Where do they make up the time from the missing day?
It's always typically just extending the school day. Luckily for some of these school districts, they already have exceeded the state minimum instructional hours. So it just might be adding 20 minutes onto the school day, whereas you get some that are adding 90 minutes to the school day. But typically, it's going to be making the school day longer versus extending out the school year.
Who gets to make this decision? I know there are a lot of fights over school start times, which are typically driven by things like busing contracts and athletic schedules.
In some states, like Massachusetts, you have to go and be approved at the state level for your district to do this. But, a lot of these states, it's a local school board decision. And they have to take into consideration, busing and things like that. But in a lot of these states now are allowing their local school boards to make the decision.
You spent some time in Pueblo City Schools, which is in southern Colorado. Tell us what you saw there where they're on the 4-day week.
In talking to parents there, the initial reaction from parents is really kind of not to like it because a lot of them are, they're wondering what's going to happen to my child on the Friday off. I have to go to work, who's going to babysit. But they tend to start really liking it because they kind of like those longer weekends. It's almost like a mini vacation, a little, family getaway. And also what that community did that I noticed, the Boys and Girls Club and some other, you have these other nonprofit groups that kind of stepped forward with pretty cheap daycare on that Friday. And I also noticed that the school district, they were providing meals at these sites too, and in some cases opening up the schools. That was a big concern. There's a lot of low-income residents in this city, so that was the concern. Sometimes that's the only meal for kids is when they go to school, but the school district is providing meals there.
I thought your story was a really good example of how these kinds of changes don't happen in a vacuum and can't happen in a vacuum. You've got to have the public buy-in and you've got to have the wraparound support services to make these kinds of changes.
Definitely. Like I was talking to, I think it was Virginia, and he really wants to do it. He's in a rural area and they don't really have daycares, and he knows he has to have that kind of stuff in place for this to work because it is, in a lot of cases, a community effort.
We're talking with Donnell Hobbs. She's a national education reporter for the Wall Street Journal about her reporting on a surge in school districts moving to a 4-day academic week. This week's episode of EWA Radio is sponsored by the American Federation of Teachers. AFT was founded in 1916 and today represents 1.7 million members in education, health, and public service. Visit aft.org for more information. EWA retains all editorial control over programming and content. Tawnell, let's talk a little bit about what some of the research shows about the impact of a 4-day week. What did you find out?
And, the research does show that academics don't suffer. And, there was some thought by some of the educators that, your kids are in school one less day, it's going to suffer. That's not the finding. The finding is that academics don't suffer. And in talking to a lot of teachers and principals, they just feel like the students are actually more well rested and they actually miss fewer days. Students are in school more, probably because they have 3-day weekends, so they show up for the other 4 days.
How are teachers adjusting what they teach? I mean, obviously, the curriculum expectations stay the same, even if the week gets shorter.
There's some teachers, after a 3-day weekend, they get pretty, how much is the student going to retain? And so they might not test on that following Monday and might test on Tuesday to do Monday like a review day because they've had a 3-day weekend. So you get that. And then you also get teachers who are kind of wrapping up lesson plans on Thursday for the following week. So they have to be more organized too.
Is there anything being left out, though, Tawnell? I mean, things like fine arts or extracurriculars or recess.
I could not find school districts that were leaving things out at all. And I did look for that just to kind of see, well, what did you drop? What did you drop? And I didn't find any signs for that. Granted, there are 600 districts, so I didn't pull them all. If you're an education reporter and your district is doing that, you should definitely look at. But I just didn't see big instances of that. And I actually read a lot of studies and I didn't find that to be the case.
What surprised you about this story?
What surprised me is the love of the 4-day week. In talking to parents and students and administrators, they just all really love it. So that's probably what surprised me. I thought with teachers, it would be kind of mixed because it's like, I got to work with the kids all day. They're going to be getting tired at the end of the day. And I just didn't get a lot of that. And I really talked to the teachers a lot because I didn't want them just to put a happy face on it. But truly, they really like it. I bet you the teachers I talked to, it was well over 95% that were just ecstatic with it.
What's been the reaction to your story more broadly? I know there's been some media interest that's perked up, and you've even done a few interviews yourself.
People are kind of mixed about it. From the emails, it's like, hey, can we try this in my state? And then there are some people that feel like U.S. students are already in school for fewer days than if you look at, international numbers and that kids need to be in school. Obviously, the school districts would say, hey, they're getting the hours. It's just a longer day for them. So it's kind of mixed.
What are a couple of story ideas for local reporters who might be looking at academic calendars more broadly, even if their district is not considering moving to a 4-day week?
Yeah, what I found interesting in researching this story was how the different districts, they have different minimum state requirements as far as how many hours or how many days they're going to teach. I mean, the state has the minimum set hours, but districts can exceed that. And I think I was kind of surprised by seeing these districts actually exceed the minimum required hours or days of instruction. So I think it'd be interesting to look at that And especially if you're covering several districts, if you have a district that is just like well exceeding the minimum required instruction hours or days, are they doing much better? Does it really make a difference? For reporters that are covering districts with 4-day weeks, I would recommend to look at, how much money are they saving, kind of look at where they were before going to 4-day and where they are now. Look at their transportation spending, their utilities spending, look at their vacancies. The belief is, and a lot of these districts tell me, this is a recruiting tool right now. Is it really bringing teachers in? Is turnover down? That's something to look at.
You moved to the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago from the Dallas Morning News. You're on the national education beat. What makes a story a Wall Street Journal education story? What are you looking for?
What I look for, I'm looking for national appeal. I'm looking for stories that could be a talker from the smallest town to the largest city. Is it new? Is it fresh? Is it trending? If it's a story that's been out for a while, I'm always looking for that interesting angle that has yet to be explored. And I always go back to ask, why should the readers care? I've got to be able to tell them why they should care, why this is important, and why I'm putting this on the radar. And it doesn't have to be just a big national story. It could be a local story that has national reach. It could be in a small town, but, somebody in Hawaii or California, wherever, they're like, wow, that's interesting. The interest just has to be there.
Donnell Hobbs is a national education reporter for the Wall Street Journal. She joined us from her office in New York City. Tawnell, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that wraps up another episode for us. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education journalists and improve the quality of education coverage. For more than 70 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, and thanks for listening.